Preparing YouTube Live, setting up your webinar. And we're live. Great. I'm going to mute myself. All right. Thank you all for joining us for June 2022 Merge PHP. This month we're doing Laravel versus Symfony. We've got two great speakers, Joshua Copeland and Hunter. Joshua Copeland is the CTO of Rote DevForce and works with clients all over the world. Has a really great team of engineers, and I think he'll tell you more about his company and what he does. But he is from PHP Vegas user group. And then our second presenter here is Hunter Spracek. I always butcher your last name.
That was correct.
Close. And he's from Austin. He's been programming since he was 14 and started programming in PHP functional spaghetti code before OOP. That sounds like 5 or 4 probably. And similar to my story. And fast forward 8 years, he's learned all the things, and he runs Laravel Austin. If you're looking to learn more about, spoiler alert, Hunter's going to be talking about Laravel. But if you're
wait, what? Oh shit!
Definitely check out Laravel Austin on Meetup, and I think you guys are going back to doing in-person events now. So anyone here in Austin, definitely go RSVP for Laravel July. You already had your meeting in June. So with that being said, let's take it away. Josh, I don't know who's going first, but
so just a heads up, I think Hunter and I haven't rehearsed this, if you will. So I think him and I can kind of jump in as we kind of get across slides, because it's kind of a little disorganized. There's like Symfony slide and then a Laravel slide, so we'll kind of take it in strides here. I'm sure we'll be fine. But yeah, just a little heads up that we probably should have rehearsed this, but we didn't. So we apologize if there's any goofs along the way.
Another way to look at it is, this is not a scripted debate, so we don't know the winner of this debate beforehand.
Oh, well, winner.
Josh has who he thinks the winner is.
Well, the winner is going to be determined by an elephant battle at the end. So whoever wins, I think from there we'll see who comes out the reigning champion. So
yeah, mine are all at the office, so I lost already.
Okay, let me share my screen here.
Yes. Okay, good.
Okay, how's that look?
Good.
Good. Cool. So yeah, a couple of notes before we get started here. Shout out to Merge PHP. I want to say definitely over 6 months now you guys have been around, and I appreciate inviting Las Vegas, PHP Vegas to join up. I think it's a great idea. One of the biggest problems with PHP is just the community is open source by nature, so there's a lot of fracturing going on, and anything to centralize and bring the community together, I think, is a great thing, especially like the PHP Foundation now and all these other things. So a lot of good things happening for the PHP community there. So shout out to all the organizers, Logan and everyone else running Merge PHP. I appreciate having us here today. Also, just a little backstory about Hunter and I did have the pleasure of meeting Hunter for Longhorn. He promptly picked me up and dropped me off to the airport, and I did not miss my flight, so I appreciate that. He is a great guy from our chats and stuff like that, so I'm excited to have this talk with you. And I want to make it really loose. If you have something to jump in on the Symfony side, or if I think you missed something on the Laravel side, I may chirp. It's not by any means you speak, I speak, or something weird like that. Like we can totally make this a collaborative effort here. Before we get started, Hunter, do you want to just give a little bit of your background? I know Logan kind of gave some background of yours, but anything you want to add there?
Yeah, especially since I unhelpfully forgot to put actually a slide in this presentation about me and who I am. Yeah, so I mean, Logan covered a bit of it, but I think that bio might be a couple years old from like the first time I spoke at Longhorn before I was an organizer. So yeah, I've been doing PHP for a while. I've been programming, like I said, since I was like 14 back in high school. I'm currently a software engineering manager at a company here in Austin called Modernized Home Services by Quinn Street. We got acquired in 2020, which was just a perfect time to go through an acquisition. So got that little byline now. And yeah, we're a primarily Laravel shop. We do have a Slim application in our stack, albeit a bit of a legacy project. But yeah, we were PHP through and through to the acquisition, and now we are seeing what merging PHP and Java services together is like, where I'm at. So having a lot of fun.
Let me think a little bit here, but is Slim its own thing, or does it use components of Symfony, or
I want to say Slim is Symfony components.
I know that the newest version is a majority of the stuff that they wrote. There's a lot of PSR compatibility in there, so you can bring in different components of different things that you want, like a router or things like that.
Gotcha. Yeah. I don't want this to disparage other frameworks out there. Obviously, these are two of the big ones, but yeah, things like Slim, Silex, Cake,
Code Igniter.
They're all love. Yeah. That's where I started. We can't hate that.
Same here.
This is definitely obviously a talk geared towards the two big frameworks out there in the PHP space. So by no means does this write off other ones. So let's jump right into it. So you've met me. I've been programming for a while now. I've also, in the last 5 years, started my own freelance company called Remote Dev Force. We build, projects for clients all over the world. I've got about a dozen developers in the US that we work on various projects. Always looking for new projects too. If anybody does have a project that they need a few extra senior developers to help them with, whether it's PHP, Python, Node, or front end, we've got you covered. I run the PHP Vegas users group. I have been for over 5 years here. Love giving back to the community. When I started over 15 years ago programming, there was no meetup, and it was very difficult on how to reach out and join a community and grow your career. So these are big reasons why I give back to conferences and meetups, because our future junior programmers can benefit a lot from this sort of content. So aunt and husband and father takes up all my free time there. So if you do want to reach out to me, if you have a project or you need a couple of extra developers, feel free to email me at josh@remotedevforce.com. I'm also giving away a 1-month SymphonyCast membership. SymphonyCast is obviously about Symfony. It's kind of competitor to Laracast, right? So if you do want that, shoot me an email. First person to email me in that same fashion, I will give you that 1 month for free. Shout out Ryan Weaver, who does all the content for the site. It's actually a really good resource to learn Symfony. So the overview of this talk is just going to go over first impressions, features of each framework, and then some final thoughts. I think even at the end, perhaps we could open it up to the chat or other panelists here, especially during the talk. If anybody does have anything, feel free to make us aware, and we will try to address it at that point. So let's dive right in. So I guess what are your first impressions, Hunter, of Laravel? Like from even when you first used it to now, how do you feel about it? Be honest.
I I'm not. This is definitely not a bias from being the person who runs the Laravel Austin meetup group, but I have, from when I started using Laravel back when it was like maybe 4.3, 4.2, like it's been a while. It was it was just easy to get into. Like CodeIgniter was very much an easy to get into framework, but the trajectory of my career took me to being like out of college, still in college, working for a startup. And what I liked about Laravel, that I would admittedly say was it's a double-edged sword, is that it was very easy to get the project up and running and build what the startup needed to have a product, and it was great. And where the double-edged sword came in was that it was so flexible and easy to make changes that unfortunately our CEO's constantly changing vision that had nothing to do with the flavor of investor he talked to that week. Laravel fortunately and unfortunately allowed us to pivot very quickly to address these new changes and features we were supporting, which I think is a strength. But I think some of that flexibility, if you're not careful, can be a weakness too. That's actually something the team that I'm part of has had to learn, especially as we are a shop that was originally using self-made homegrown frameworks and then started using Laravel a couple of months before I joined the company. So I still like it. It's my go-to for building things at work, especially because the decisions we made as an engineering team. But in my free time, even a personal project I'm working on right now, Laravel was my go-to.
Absolutely. I mean, all of the sentiments I share. Both of these frameworks I do truly love. Laravel is one of those, I think, that makes the business spoiled because you can create features so quickly. Sometimes their expectations can get a little high. And yeah, you can run into some of that. So we'll get into that in a little bit more. But yeah. And Symfony, I started using Symfony right when they jumped from Symfony 1 to 2. Then the company I was working for decided to bring it in-house and start using it for some of their front-end websites. And a lot of these senior developers I was around were keeping their eye on this. And right when it hit 2, they said, let's use this thing. I think, the big renaissance for PHP when Composer came out was massive. Without Composer, Jordy, shout out Jordy, PHP wouldn't be where it's at today. So between Symfony and Composer, I think was just a huge leapfrog for the language itself. However, in kind of, I would say, almost the opposite fashion of Laravel, although some can argue Symfony could be used for rapid prototyping, I would disagree if the developer is not comfortable with Symfony. There is a learning curve to Symfony, and someone coming from a greenfield project, having to learn Symfony from the ground up, albeit the great documentation, depending on the level of developer, it could be challenging. However, Symfony does, I think, give you a lot of power in the same fashion Laravel does. And just overall is a great framework. And with, it's funny, both frameworks kind of had their talking heads, with Symfony being Fabian and then Taylor Otwell with Laravel. And you can see kind of like the communities growing from kind of the way that they both lead these frameworks. I would say too, it's interesting that it's a little bit regional when it comes to usage of Laravel and Symfony. Obviously, France, and Europe, Symfony is favored versus United States. Laravel is massively dominant. So just kind of interesting. I believe that there's a website out there actually that shows demographic breakdowns of that.
I've always wondered if that is like a US versus Europe cultural difference when it comes to like careers and professional and all that has the US leaning towards Laravel versus Europe and France and Germany. I've never been able to figure it out yet. I'm not sure if anybody's done the digging, but it has been fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm being a little stereotypical here, but being a United States citizen myself, we want things fast, cheap, and easy. And Laravel is very good at that. Someone who is a novice programmer can jump into Laravel and really impress their clients or their boss very quickly with that framework. Perhaps, other countries or whatever. I mean, obviously, again, this is just being very general here. They're a little bit more tactical about how they're building things, and again, perhaps it's also just a historical thing since it was built Fabians in France and all that. Who knows? But anyway, so the documentation on Symfony side, I think, is very mature. Again, shout out Ryan Weaver. And also, if you're looking to contribute back to open source and you're a new developer, documentation is a great way to start to give back to the community. I know PHP's actual core docs are looking for contributors, as well as both of these frameworks would appreciate contributions. So just a note there. But yeah, my experience with the Symfony documentation has been great. A lot of good examples. And there are some kind of like pitches to buy this Symfony fast track book too, that kind of dives into things a little deeper, but I have not had the need to actually buy that. Everything's there. And I think a part of it too is, reading other people's code, diving into some of these framework components, Symfony components and things like that, can help shed a little bit more light sometimes when docs aren't completely clear. So that's my experience there. What do you think, Hunter, about Laravel documentation?
I would say overall, like it's good. It's okay. It's fine. When I first started, doing this more like professionally, when I first started using Laravel back in the day, compared to other frameworks, Laravel's was just easier to read. It's no secret that Taylor's, I think one of his mottos or something you said at the time was, sweat the small stuff, or maybe those Jeffrey Way. It's hard to keep track these days. It's been so many years. And like the documentation shows, like it's got a very keen eye for like detail. It's clean, easy to read, things like that. I would say in the years since the framework has grown and expanded both its scope of functionality and complexity, I think it still shines and is strong in the documentation that is necessary, or not necessarily necessary, but is conducive to rapid application development. But when you really start, like when you've made it past MVP, when you're past that rapid stage where you have the time to think and be more tactical and need to dive into some of the more like fine-grained pieces of the framework, I think the documentation starts to falter. There are some pieces where the documentation is missing, and admittedly, I, like probably many others who have complained about it and then not done a single thing to contribute back to the documentation and be the change you want to see in the world. So it, oops, I guess is the best I could say. But like when it starts to get into the more like that digging deeper section that we see in this on the sidebar has a lot of topics underneath it, and it does dig deeper. But there are parts of the Laravel framework that kind of get mentioned in passing through like changelog notes or tweets from Dre's or Numonardo. I think I butchered that name horribly. Nuno, I apologize. All that group, it'll come across, but it's not in the documentation. Like I see it a lot in the Laravel chat on the Texas PHP Slack of conversations that have happened over the years and been like, I didn't know this was in the framework, but it's been there this entire time, and it's actually super useful for complex use cases. But since the documentation is more geared towards that entry to intermediate level, it feels like it's starting to lack. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think it's a good sign that the framework is maturing and becoming, less of that rough up and start rapid kid back in the day to fitting more in line with the frameworks that have been around a little bit longer, like Symfony and Zend. But there's the docs, I think, are stuck in this weird balance of rapid application development and document literally everything, even if it's incredibly complex and hard to simplify.
Yeah, I agree there. Perhaps that's another reason why Laravel is a bit better in that aspect of rapid prototyping. Is it's very simple and kind of A through Z walks you through all of the features in the framework. Symfony, I have noticed I have hopped around quite a bit to get to different topics, and then perhaps you have pages that have some duplicated content or something shares a little more than others. So yeah, it's just clean. I think Laravel did a really good job with keeping the docs really clean. But yeah, I agree. Advanced things sometimes, you just got to start to experiment in code and see how it works, sort of thing. I've had that experience, I know, with Eloquent and some complex joins or something like that. Just reading it, I'm like, okay, I think this should work. Like just going and doing it, I think is what helped me. Testing it out. Yeah.
And arguably, you could say that these more complex cases are where things like Laracast and SymphonyCast come into play to dive into the more complex. But those, I'm not as familiar with SymphonyCast, but based on the fact that you have a license to raffle away, I'm assuming like they're both paid experiences with probably some free content too. But then it dives from laravel.com/docs is free documentation. And that should be where any developer goes to. I shouldn't have to also pay somebody else to get the full documentation, you could argue, but you can't document everything about the framework. There are things the framework, technically, both frameworks, I think, allow you to do that even the creators of those frameworks could never imagine like anyone doing with them. So like there is a fine line, and I can see the case being made and foreshadowing some future slides on Laravel. You shouldn't necessarily have to go pony up some money to be able to get that advanced documentation, but it's a hard line to draw, I would say, for both frameworks.
Yeah, totally. I thought I saw somebody's hand go up virtually. If anybody does have questions, feel free to drop it in the Q&A at the bottom or the chat, and we will attempt to answer that as we go through this. So maybe you want to speak a little bit about the ecosystem of Laravel, maybe what you've used and what you like.
Yeah, so I will say it is impressive what the Laravel ecosystem has to offer, and even like at work, we're not necessarily using everything that the ecosystem has to offer. I think I've started using more of it in my recent for funsies side project, but you know, Longhorn PHP is using Forge, for example, to run and deploy the website for the conference because it's just so easy. I never personally used Envoyer, but at the time when it came out and it fit what I was doing for work, but it was just at my previous company, just was hard to argue the benefits versus the cost. But there's so much, and it just keeps growing over time. It's insane. Like Sail, I use Sail now for a side project. I'm using Vapor to deploy that same project. At work, we're using Horizon for queue monitoring and queue distribution, which is nice. We used to use Lumen for our API when I first joined, before we were pulling in so many additional packages that I finally said enough is enough. We should just use the full version of the framework with how much we're pulling in. Mix, I don't know if I'm ever gonna bother learning Webpack it's raw because it's just so complicated, and then Laravel Mix exists and it's just so easy and a nice little wrapper around it. So there are so many things. Like Telescope is Laravel's answer to Symfony Profiler, though you could also argue Laravel Debug Bar is in the same scope as that tool. There is a lot there, but, and I'm assuming you've got an animation to progress on the slide, if I remember the preview correctly. Not all these options are free. A lot of them are, but things like Nova, Forge, Vapor, Envoyer, Spark, all of those just the one that said, all of those cost money, and either a one-time or a monthly, annually paying thing, and it can definitely like add up depending on what you're doing. I would say the price is typically like worth it. Like I personally don't have an issue with paying for a Vapor and Nova license for my little like side project I'm working on. I also pay for Forge personally to deploy a bunch of my friends' websites who know enough to build a website, not enough to host and run it. So I just use Forge to manage their sites because it's easy and I can just hook into their GitHub repos. And yeah, there's a lot, and there's even more, and this is just the official like ecosystem from Laravel proper. There's so much more out there.
Yeah. One of the smartest things I think Taylor did was build Forge, because I think that was a really confusing thing for developers who had no server experience, was deploying their applications, right? So I think Symfony was a little bit behind, if I'm not mistaken. Perhaps they were using, there is a company called Deploy.io or something like that they're using. But having this kind of like easy to use tool set, I think, is also a part of the reason Laravel is so widely used by developers. On the Symfony side, there is a lot of tooling as well and support out there, but you have to go find it. And I think that's where Symfony falls short a little bit compared to Laravel. Laravel kind of shows you the way, and Symfony kind of expects you to find your own way. There are some suggestions and things like that Symfony does give developers through their Friends of Symfony program. But when it comes to the ecosystem that Laravel has, it's really all in-house. And again, Symfony is more open source-ish. Some of these things just outside the hands of Symfony even. So, it's again, just kind of, I think, what you want to go with if you want to go with everything that's just kind of handed to you. Something that's, could be opinionated, like how Laravel is contested as so, versus kind of doing it the way that you want to, and build it your own, roll your own, or whatever with Symfony. Both of them obviously have their own pros and cons, but generally everything on both sides is open source and free. Yeah, I think that's one area that Symfony, perhaps Fabian, could have jockeyed more in the beginning to create more of a tool set that Laravel does have. I know there's a lot of catch up that Symfony has done to fill a lot of the gaps that Laravel has had solutions for recently, that we'll dive into here in a little bit. So, these are just my opinions. By no means, again, this is like the lay of the land. So, I think as a high level comparison between the two frameworks, I feel Laravel is highly opinionated, kind of gives you, cookie cutters, and then Symfony kind of gives you a big thing of metal and says, make your own cookie cutter, right? You can do things multiple ways in Symfony, and sometimes Laravel just like, here's how you do it. There's kind of one way or whatnot. Again, that's generalizing, but it is easy. Laravel's super duper duper easy. If you're new to programming in general, PHP, Laravel is probably going to be a far better experience than diving into something like Symfony. However, Symfony has come a long way. It is a lot easier to use and set up. So it could be argued that it is not difficult. But again, the documentation and stuff for Laravel is very clean and kind of walks you through that. Symfony does as well, but perhaps could be a little confusing. Laravel has a very mature ecosystem. Symfony is very componentized. You kind of have to find your own solutions out there in the wild. Again, to reiterate what Hunter said, Laravel is just great at rapid prototyping. If you're building a small API, going with like Lumen, or if you're building a full-fledged website, there's a lot of things Laravel offers that can get you up and running fairly quickly. I would argue Symfony is enterprise ready. I know of a lot of very large companies using Symfony that are diligent about writing unit tests, feature tests. Everything's got to be under all that kind of stuff. Sometimes I think in Laravel, and this could go for both frameworks, right? But things can get a little cowboy. So with facades and things like that, a developer can do a lot of damage if they're not structuring their code correctly, doing things like dependency injection versus just pulling random objects out of thin air. Do you want to share anything about this slide, Hunter?
No, I think you covered it pretty well.
Okay. They're both model view controller. I'm not sure if there's any other design pattern out there that I should be aware of other than MVC when it comes to a full stack framework like this. Yeah, they're basically both model view controller. There's a bunch of big companies out there using both of these. Like I said, Symfony may have some enterprise companies, but Laravel does too. They have Pfizer, BBC. A couple of these listed here are clients that I work with as well, using both of these frameworks. So they're both great. It's not like none of the big companies out there are not using these. They definitely are. So this slide is probably old, but the framework usage distribution out there, let's see here, in the top 1 million websites. So 18% of websites out of the top 1 million websites out there 18% of them are using PHP. And I'm sure it could be argued that that's probably a higher number because that other probably contains a lot of WordPress. But here, I'm not exactly sure the rise and dip here, but I believe the red line is Laravel, blue line is Symfony. Wait, here we go. Okay, top 1 million. So this is the same thing, but here's Laravel's usage statistics here. Again, yeah, these are a little old, but you can see Laravel has a pretty big grasp of let's see, the top 1 million websites, 1,600, probably more by now, or 16,000, excuse me, are using Laravel. And I'm sure that number is larger now. I'm not sure why Symfony is not spelled correctly here, but I pulled this from Similar Tech, and it kind of broke down between the two frameworks what industries out there are using Symfony versus Laravel. I found it interesting that the one that Symfony does lead in is healthcare. I personally worked on a few HIPAA projects for my company where we've helped clients set up Symfony, as well as worked on existing Symfony projects. So I'm not sure why I've ran into that, but it does seem like a lot of healthcare related stuff. Perhaps again, it's maybe just testing and things like that, but they slightly eke out a little bit of a lead there. And then every other category, Laravel just, of course, blows it out of the water. One interesting thing about Laravel versus Symfony is the supported databases. So one of them, to be honest here, I'm not sure who is using Drizzle or SAP. I mean, I've heard of Sybase, right? Don't get me wrong. But perhaps Laravel not supporting these is not that big of a deal. And with modern PHP, I'm sure there's a way that you could get it to work in Laravel. But out of the box, Symfony does support more connections via Doctrine, which is really the ORM under the hood, and Laravel having Eloquent under the hood. And we'll dive into a little bit more comparisons there. But perhaps the one thing here could be Oracle. Maybe that's the reason why healthcare is eking out a little bit on Symfony's side, is because, I'm sure a lot of healthcare companies are running Oracle DB. But mainly SQLite, MySQL have been kind of the big ones I've worked on, with a few exceptions. Anything to add here, Hunter?
I actually had no idea what Drizzle was when I first saw the slides, and I went to go look it up, and apparently Drizzle is now defunct. So,
okay, well,
I was like, all right, I guess I didn't miss much. No, this is pretty accurate. Laravel has support for some of these, like Oracle, for example, but they're not official support like Doctrine and Symfony provides. So it's not one of those out of the boxes that comes handy. And is it recently acquired by a company that uses Oracle database for its other systems, having to become very familiar with the intricacies of that database server.
Yeah,
But you pretty much covered it. I have no idea what SAP Sybase is. I'm not gonna lie, no idea. And they get a chance to reference it, but it looks like a mouthful to say.
Yeah, SAP Sybase SQL Anywhere. Yeah, but yeah, I guess I'll pour one for Drizzle later tonight. RIP. Oracle can be painful. It was a PSQL, or I don't know, the stored procedure stuff. It's not cool. Anyway, so certifications in both of these frameworks. I'll speak for Symfony. I've gotten certified a while back in the 2 days. And obviously, both these frameworks, I think, are competitively priced. They're both listed around €250. I do the conversion there. I'm not exactly sure. But both of them do have certifications you can get. I'm not. I mean, are you aware of anything that these certifications offer other than you being able to wave around a piece of paper saying you know the framework?
Not really. No.
Yeah.
I
So
I fully encourage anyone to, go on the learning journey that it takes to prepare for these certifications and go for them if that is your prerogative. But I will say, as a hiring manager, I have not once looked for someone having a certification in Laravel or
yeah.
anything for that matter.
I think if I were like a Laravel or Symphony shop and a resume came across my desk that they did have one of these certifications, even if it was an older version of the framework, that would probably rise a little bit higher. But that by no means, I think, writes people off that do not have these certifications, because I think it is rare that you do see people with these certifications.
Yeah. Especially once you already have a software engineering job, it's like, well, I already got the job and I'm getting paid to do the job. I think that's certification in itself that I know enough to get myself in trouble and make the business money. And
Yeah.
that's usually good enough for a lot of folks.
Especially self-taught programmers, the last thing they want to do is go take a test. You know what I mean? So,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
I started self-taught, went to college for a comp sci degree, and the taking tests on it was never my favorite part.
Yeah. I would say probably a boot camp or a college degree is worth a little bit more weight, obviously. At least even in my experience, applying for programming positions was difficult 15 years ago if you didn't have any experience. But the minute I started to go to college for a programming degree and put that on my resume as I'm going to college for this, I started to get calls back. So, yeah, I mean, anyway.
Like Kalen said in the chat, is at least my personal experience of would rather experience. Let the experience of yourself or the candidate in the hiring situation speak than the piece of paper.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've some of the greatest developers I know out there have high school education, and that's it. Like they just self-taught everything, and if you're very pragmatic and can be independent in your learning, I think these certifications don't mean much in that case. But there are probably some weird edge cases, if you will, out there where these certifications may be needed or whatnot. So they're out there. One thing I did want to point out, Symfony does have an option to just do Twig. So if you are a front end developer for Symfony, perhaps that might be something to take a look at. Versus I don't think Laravel actually had like a Blade certification per se. But again, I reserve the right to be wrong. I know these slides are a little old, but just worth a shout out there. So the learning resources other than the documentation and examples out there are SymfonyCast and Laracast. Both of these are amazing resources to learn from. Not only the framework themselves, but a lot of the tooling around it. So for example, JavaScript, love-hate relationship with that, but you can learn a lot about just programming in general, obviously in conjunction with the framework. And some people are different learners, right? Some people will learn by doing, some people learn by hearing, some people learn by, all these different things. So this, I think, gives that video aspect and examples for people really to walk through and understand more advanced topics of these frameworks. So I have not personally dove deep into Laracasts. What would you say about Laracast? I'm assuming you've used it, Hunter.
I have. When I first got started with Laravel, I definitely was living and breathing Laracast for quite a while, both to kind of simultaneously refresh my PHP knowledge, learn more about Laravel, and maybe at the beginning of my career, some way, somehow, watching Jeffrey's videos, even when he had some slight mistakes, helped a little bit with my imposter syndrome, getting used to being a paid to do this individual. I will admit, I have not been on Laracast in a while. Not to say that there are not more things for me to learn, but the problems that I now am solving in my day to day, either for work or just because I think it's a unique problem to think about, are less Laravel specific and more software architectural. The language doesn't necessarily matter, more just how it's built. So I still pay for Laracast, if that says anything, and I have not used it personally in quite some time, but I offer it to any of my reports that I manage who are interested in but don't want to necessarily spend the money. And we haven't renewed our business license in a while because no one was using it. But I highly recommend it. I personally have not gone in to watch something in a while, but I have seen some good content that I've been interested in. And there's some stuff I probably should have been watching when I taught myself Inertia.js. But like you said, different learning styles for different people. Mine is a bit stubborn and where I will just bash my head against the wall until I get the thing I'm trying to work. May not be the right way, but it'll work. And that might be why I like Laravel at times, because I'll get it working and it won't be the right way. Acromis or anybody else would look at it and be very angry at me, but it's functioning, which is the thing that matters the most to me at first.
Yeah, well, one of the greatest CTOs I ever worked with years ago told me, I said, this code is just so bad, it's so spaghetti, and he goes, at the end of the day, it just works. And I was like, okay, amen. But yeah, both of these I think are outstanding resources for new and intermediate, even senior devs out there to dive into topics. For example, I wanted to add Stripe to a Symfony project I was working on. So the Stripe SDK for charging cards. And sure enough, Ryan Weaver with Symfony Cast has a talk on how to, using Composer, pull in the Stripe PHP SDK, set things up, get it configured with Symfony, charge credit cards, and do all that good stuff. I'm sure Laracast has the same thing with Cashier. So kind of an interesting comparison there. Symfony using the direct Stripe SDK versus I'm sure Cashier under the hood is kind of pulling all of that stuff in for you. Perhaps you have to include, I'm not totally sure, but
yeah, it does.
I'm gonna jump in. This might be a good spot to address the question from earlier Eduardo had. What is your opinion on the learning curve of each framework, and do you think it's getting much more complex and like with the newer versions that are coming out?
I'm not sure if I necessarily have a like solid, straightforward answer. I would say like yes and no. Like right now at my job, we are maintaining Laravel applications on version 5.5, version 6, no 7, and then everything else is on 8. So our engineering team or department is unfortunately, and it has been a bit frustrating, familiar with having to maintain a handful of major Laravel versions, let alone their minor versions in between. I think that over time, yes, tools like Laravel and Symfony are just going to become a little bit more complex to learn. And I think there's a balancing act as new tools and technology have come into the fray. Some of that has brought complexity to the ecosystem. And I think at first that's necessary, but it'll get easier over time. I mean, look at Docker as an example. When Docker first came on the scene, that seemed like the most complex Pandora's box that I never thought I was ever going to understand. And I like to at least consider myself to be a decently smart individual. But Docker has improved over time, and through that improvements, it got more complex, and then it got less complex as it simplified those things. I think the upgrade path and maintaining a fuller versions with newer versions and how fast the iterations are happening, I don't necessarily think that is a Laravel specific problem. I think people working with Symfony apps can and do experience the same problems. But to what Josh's comment was earlier of how like Symfony is kind of considered more enterprise ready, the style development that happens in those type of shops is drastically different. Like those are the shops that look at LTS versions and go, yes, that is exactly what I need and the only thing I care about, because they have to keep the long-term support maintained. Unlike Laravel, who's still figuring it out on how it wants to do LTS versions. At least it's calmed down its upgrade and release cycle to be a little bit more maintainable. But I'm not as familiar with Symfony. Josh, can you jump in here? Tools like Laravel Shift, for example, not officially a part of the ecosystem, but definitely a pretty big component now, I think helps with that problem between automating the upgrade so you can get off of older versions to all kinds of stuff that I am forgetting his name. The developer, the mind behind Laravel Shift, he's been doing a lot of awesome things, and it's come to, I think it helps alleviate this problem. I think there's room to improve still.
Yeah, I think perhaps one thing that could be confusing, and I could be mistaken about this, but I think at one point Laravel was using romantic versioning versus semantic versioning, right? So I think some of the version numbers may confuse people, and how they were determining LTS and stuff like that probably was a little confusing. So I think that probably contributes to some of the frustrations with past versions here in both of these, in Laravel, but both of these frameworks, if you're dealing with legacy versions or whatever, deprecated versions, it's going to be tough. Yeah, I mean, Laravel Shift is amazing. Like I'm sure perhaps there's something kind of like that for Symfony, maybe. I can't say for sure. If there's not, that'd probably be a great project for somebody to work on. But Laravel Shift, I think, is kind of the cheat code to upgrading to your more modern versions. However, is not a silver bullet, right? Like there's still manual steps in certain cases, especially jumping PHP versions and stuff like that. But as far as the learning curve or how difficult both are to learn, I think both have gotten to a good point to where an intermediate developer could look at both of these frameworks, set up a project fairly easily. I think once you actually start diving into, creating your own features and things like that, more just speaks about what type of developer you are. I think Laravel does sometimes make things too easy with facades and can create some unmaintainable code unless they're using proper dependency injection and things like that, can cause some serious issues. So Laravel gives you enough rope to hang yourself sometimes. And Symfony, I think, corners you a bit into doing things with, containers and structuring your code in a way that makes it testable. That's not to say you can't go in Symfony and do the same things, like just injecting the container and then just pulling out a bunch of stuff in the same fashion that Laravel does with facades. But perhaps maybe the documentation leads developers down that path more than Symfony does. But I think, as far as the learning curve, I think Laravel's probably got a slight advantage. I think there's probably more content out there, more articles, etc. So perhaps Laravel would eke out the win there. Cool. Appreciate that question.
Yeah, thank you, Eduardo.
So installing and setting up both of these frameworks, I think, is a heck of a lot easier nowadays versus the Composer days of which we're still in Composer days, but now both of these frameworks have their own CLIs, their own kind of commands you can run to get things set up. For Symfony's setup, you basically just need to install the Symfony binary. So you run this command here, and then that gives you this fancy little Symfony command that you can run things like Symfony new if you want to create a new project. You say, give it a project name, what version of Symfony you want to use, and you can pass in some flags. If you want a skeleton app that comes with, an example page and all that kind of stuff, or if you want just something super slim, like an API, for example, if you didn't want the front end components, you can pass in some flags to do that. They're probably, I think, on my GitHub OG programmer. If you look up Laravel versus Symfony, there's probably a project there that I have both of these Symfony and Laravel set up there. There's probably nothing there worth looking at. You can go to basically Symfony or Laravel's website, follow the setup instructions, and kind of walks you through the same things that I did here. So one thing that is cool about Symfony, and I'm sure Laravel's got something like this, but there is the Symfony server start command, which uses the PHP dev server underneath the hood, and gets you up and running fairly quickly with Symfony. Now, one note about this, I have set up Docker with Laravel and Symfony, both manually as well as with Laravel Sail, Homestead, all that stuff. One thing Symfony sucks at is Docker support. It's probably more Docker's fault than Symfony, but the file system handling. Symfony is very heavy when it comes to reading files, writing cache files. It basically just thrashes when you make a call to a dev server that doesn't have anything cached. If you're using Symfony on a production system and caches it once, everything's hunky-dory. But if you're doing local development, Symfony can be very painful if you're using a Docker setup. So what I've had to do, and I know Docker has made leaps and bounds in trying to improve their NFS, or there's like a new, I think it's Vizzy, some file system, experimental file system that they're introducing to try to address this issue. But one thing I did is I just simply used the Symfony server command here. And then on Docker, I just use Docker for running MySQL. And, one thing that does suck is the developer has to make sure they have the correct version of PHP installed on their machine. But other than that, it is lightning fast if you do it this way. If you throw everything in the containers, Symfony is going to be dreadfully slow. Laravel, not so much. from my experience. I'm sure you can get a speed boost from Laravel by using it natively in the same respect here that I'm doing with Symfony. But I just wanted to throw that out there. Shout out to Craig, who helped speed up one of my Symfony projects that I was dealing with some issues here. There was just some developers who had slower machines. They couldn't even work on the project. It was just that bad. So Fabian's wrote a lot of stuff about this, but anyway. If you want to read more about Symfony and Docker and all that kind of stuff, there's a little article there. And I think it was John Carey here, throughout one of the biggest leapfrogs for Symfony has been Symfony Flex. This was kind of Fabian's answer to how Laravel's ecosystem was so powerful, and how everything kind of was just spoon fed to you in the sense of like, here's what you should use for your mailing, email or whatever. Here's what you should use for charging cards or whatever. Kind of same thing that answers for Symfony Flex is just the recipes that you can install if you want to quickly add things like, whatever, user management, all that good stuff. So you can search all of the different Flex recipes at flex.symfony.com. So if there's something that you're looking for specifically, that is a good place to go look for a Symfony flavor of something that you want to use, like Oracle or whatever, right? Like if there was some technology you needed to bring in, this is probably a good spot first to go search. And yeah, I mentioned this PHP server is awesome. And I'm sure, like I said, Laravel, I think, has got a similar command. But once you get Symfony set up locally, you'll see a page like this if you installed the full thing. And kind of walks you through like, okay, you set up your website, go check out the tutorials, documentation, or get connected with the community. And I think Symfony has a Slack community, and then Laravel has a Discord. So if you're using either of these frameworks, you want to get connected with the communities, I'd suggest jumping into those. Have not looked at if Reddit has any subreddits, but I'm sure they're there. So Hunter, I'll kick it off to you for the Laravel side of all this.
Yeah, so there's a handful of ways to go about setting up a Laravel project. Either one of these will work, and what's nice is that you can actually see that example app or my Laravel app will kind of automatically create the directories for you. There's a CLI tool you can install as well, so you can do Laravel new, similar to Symfony new, along with a few different scaffolding options that come with that CLI, such as, using a development release, whether or not to use Laravel's Jetstream scaffolding, which just kind of gives you some basic UI and auth elements out of the box for you. If you want it to, the Laravel new tool will also initialize the Git repository for your new project, what the default branch should be. It'll create it for you on GitHub if you want to. I mean, it might be doing too much, but I understand the appeal of making things as simple and straightforward as possible. And then, yeah, once you install, Sail is right now the Laravel official Docker setup for using Docker basically to build your application. I promise I have a grasp on the English language and how to formulate sentences. Maybe not at the end of the week, but it's straightforward, easy. The PHP container for Laravel is using Artisan Serve, which is Symfony's equivalent of just using the PHP dev server. But there's other options too. Homestead, if you want a more not VirtualBox, what's the Vagrant setup versus Docker. Valet's there. I would say actually, Josh, that Laravel kind of has a little bit of the same issue. I don't remember how its sale looks at. I haven't looked at to borrow slash steal whatever a sale does out of the box recently, but as someone who's built a few custom Docker containers, Alpine, PHP, and all that jazz, at the end of those are always a file. Like local development is a pain in the ass because Laravel will also cache Blade templates through files. By default, it'll do file cache for like cache caching sessions. The file management is also it is Docker's fault, and it's actually more so specifically Docker on anything that's not Linux's fault at the moment. If you're developing on a Linux machine, you're probably listening to Josh and I right now going, "What are you talking about? I've never heard these issues." But for us on a Macs, we've had to deal with a subpar performance because Mac. Not not going to get into it. This is not the Docker talk, but that right there, experimental feature, that is a good thing to turn on. I haven't done it yet because I believe it's going to nuke all of my containers and images I've already built, and we'll have to rebuild. Yeah, and I don't have that time at the moment, but it's getting better. That's a Docker specific thing. Keep bothering the Docker team to get that improved on Macs. But yeah, Sail makes it easy to get set up for development. When you go through the Sail setup, you can actually Sail. This here vendor bin Sail up is just a wrapper around Docker Compose, and that's how you can do things like, especially if you map vendor bin to your path, then you can do things simply as Sail artisan and run the CLI tool that comes with a framework, or you can do Sail MySQL blah 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 and get a client directly into the MySQL server. Thanks to Sail, I have learned of other development tools that I did not know existed until I was looking at the documentation and was actually blown away. Mailhog is one of them. If your application does a lot of email stuff, doesn't matter what framework you're using, highly recommend using Mailhog so you don't have to actually send emails while testing. I can't remember the name of it, but they're maybe it's Milo something. There's a tool that Sail will provide for you. So if you're doing something with S3 and want to test and develop locally with a S3 type file driver, Minia, it exists. I haven't used it personally yet because the side tool that I'm working on doesn't need it yet. But yeah, setup tools straightforward, easy. You can run it locally, just doing artisan serve, and that just runs into the usual development problems of everyone needing the same PHP version on their machine. But it works. It's there. Defaults to SQLite, which works on every system for database. You can get started whatever, but very quickly, no matter what your development style is.
Yeah, I think again, this is something Symfony was a little bit behind on, but offering something like Homestead or Sail to allow developers to just say, okay, pull this down, run it, and the project's up and running. Symfony kind of is more like, hey, go learn Docker, go learn the Docker Compose commands, this,
which is not a bad thing.
Yeah,
I would say, especially we're running Laravel in production on Docker containers and ECS. So for us, how the Symfony kind of pushing you to learn this tool approach was great for us because, we had to learn it to switch our development boxes from Vagrant to Docker, but we also had to learn how to get those productionalized fine tuning for Docker. So in some you couldn't take. Actually, I shouldn't say you couldn't. You probably could. Would I recommend it? Maybe not. But you could take. You can't really easily take what Sail provides you and go, oh, okay, I'm just going to run this in production now, because that's not its intention. But with Symfony's approach of having to go learn Docker so you can go make a Docker container, blah, 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 when you're done with that process, not only do you have your local development container, but you might also just have yourself the same container that's going to run in production. Because we took doesn't run on my machine and said, I'm just going to run my machine on everyone else's machine through Docker.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I think that's one of the huge things that, running Vagrant, VirtualBox, all that was just so slow. Like when you did Vagrant up, go get like lunch because it won't be done for an hour. Docker is like a great thing when it comes to just like quickly spinning up a repeatable environment on. So I hope that the Docker team figures that out eventually. But yeah, good to know what's happening underneath the hood. You don't have to go learn it now, but being spoiled with GUIs and things like that can make you a little oblivious when things go terribly sideways and you need to fix something. Those CLI commands are going to save your production system one day. I am not sure why this slide is here, but it's showing documentation and
Laravel's beautiful default page when you get
okay, then that's what that
when you
is.
serve a new. But I will say, because I think we're moving past it, but like we touched on this for Symfony Flex. I made this comment in the chat, but I was not familiar with Symfony Flex. I think I saw it when it first was announced through browsing Twitter, and then life has happened since then. But when I was refreshing myself on Flex in preparation for this, if Flex is an answer to something Laravel was doing, then I think Flex is doing it slightly better. But I'm still undecided on some aspects. Like on one hand, Flex requires you and every developer you're working with to have the Flex Composer plugin installed, which if we're talking about Dockerized dev environments and all that, that's probably already handled for you. So like whatever. But then after that, I think I like to a degree the Symfony Flex and the recipes approach to basically setting up a composer package into a Symfony application compared to Laravel's. Laravel's doesn't require you to use a composer plugin and instead uses just additional data in the composer.json file that Laravel basically, like the framework defined and package developers are responsible for implementing that extra bit to get your automatic service provider configuration and things like that. But Flex does more. Like Flex not only installs the package, but also gets the default configuration put into place for you to work with and everything. On Laravel's side, sure, you can just run composer install Barry VDH IDE-helper, Laravel-IDE-helper. Great. And it'll automatically register that package for you with its default configuration. But to customize that configuration further or to do more, you either have to explicitly disable that feature, so it's an opt-out, not an opt-in, and the one artisan command that for years I've never been able to memorize because it's not frequently used and a pain. You have to go either copy from README files or remember the syntax to publish configuration files, asset files like blade templates, etc., to then go in and do your customizations, where Flex will by default publish those things for you to get to work making it. And maybe that's just that's the difference between Laravel and Symfony. Laravel is very much like, hey, we believe we know what's right for you. This just works and go. Symfony is very much, we don't know what you want, but we have a rough idea that you're probably going to need these things to get what you want. So here you go. Have at it. But I like the Flex. I'm imagining a Laravel's world where it goes further and I could just do composer require IDE helper and it'd be like, okay, boop, and sets everything up for us. So I would say if Flex is having an answer to something in the Laravel ecosystem, then the Laravel ecosystem needs to get its shit together and have a good reply.
I guess, yeah, where I was coming from was just you can go to Laravel's website And if you need something, there's a project there for you to go use. But you're right, you're going to have to read through the documentation on that project, follow all the instructions to run all the commands and pull everything in. And I think Flex is just, I want to use this, run the command, using Composer's pre and post hooks. You're right, it does all the copying of configuration files for you and just kind of out of the box gets things working very easily. But again, yeah, you just got to go, search for that stuff, know where to look. I think with Symfony versus Laravel, there's kind of like one nice, area where it's like, here's all the different projects you can go use or whatever. Somebody in the chat mentioned Fabian's a big proponent, or he likes the Go language, and Flex CLI kind of works similar to that, it sounds like. So
I saw that comment and it clicked, because like Go and Rust right now, which they're not the same language obviously, but they're, I feel like, trying to solve the same problems in different ways. This reminds me of their package managers, of how like easy and straightforward it is. Like, admittedly, Go goes a bit further of just being like, just fucking paste a GitHub link and we'll go figure it out for you, versus having to remember, like, all right, was the GitHub repos owner and package name matching the actual Composer JSON pack, all that mess. So
yeah,
I can see that inspiration and I can see how it's paying off. This is why, slight soapbox, regardless of which framework you think wins at the end of the night, it is super beneficial if you have the time to just read about other languages, because you can find really cool ideas of what they're doing and then borrow them or blatantly rip them off to improve our true and blue PHP. So
yeah. Well,
soapbox over.
Preach, because I think that's one thing that all programming languages, frameworks, tools, etc., they all share, is plagiarism. Because they see one language or framework doing something cool, and they're like, hey, we should do that. You saw it in the early days of PHP, even, where it was like, we are not going to be like Java. We're not going to be strongly typed language. And then sure enough, in 7, we introduced types and, all this. So it's funny to see the progression of things. But yeah, there's a lot of like good ideas being taken from a lot of other sources, I would say. So, but that's what makes everything get pushed forward. So, directory structure here, just speaking, I guess, from the Symfony side, everything's just laid out to you. With more recently, I think they've gone with the .env approach. There was like a parameter YAML file back in the day that you would add all of your stuff to. But I think Fabian and other developers with Symfony saw the growing usage of environment variables and .m files. And that is now kind of the default way to set up your different configurations for your different environments. You've got your bin directory, which sounds exactly what it is. It just it's a place for, I think a lot of things just get copied really from the vendor directory into the bin directory, if I'm not mistaken, like Symfony's CLI and perhaps maybe some other things. There's your classic Composer files, the config directory, migrations, which would be all of your doctrine migrations. Comes with like a base PHP unit file. I think even an example web test case for you. So you can start writing tests, because we're all writing tests, I'm sure, right? You've got your public directory, which sounds exactly what it is. That's where all of your public assets, JavaScript, CSS, all that good stuff is going to get stuffed in. And then your classic source directory, templates, that's going to be Twig and all that kind of stuff. Your test directory, self-explanatory. translations, that's one thing I think that I'm not sure about Laravel. You can speak more to that, Hunter, but Symfony is very like multilingual friendly, I would say, out of the box, and pushes you to creating translation files that you can, create like a multilingual website fairly easily. And your var directory and vendor directory, which are, vendor is going to be your composer packages, and then var is things like storage, cache, view cache, all that kind of stuff. And forgive me if this is a little old, Hunter, but again, I think if you're aware of any differences on the Laravel side, feel free to speak for them here. But yeah, if you want to go through that.
No, this is pretty accurate on top to today. Like there was a slight structure change a couple of versions ago, but that was under the app directory. But Laravel, like Josh said initially, Symfony, and one of the things that maybe turned me away from the framework was all these YAML configuration files to set everything up, which obviously worked, was fine to bring in environment variables, things like that, versus the .env files, which I kind of like more, albeit my team might be breaking the cardinal rule of committing env files into the repo, but that's a different topic for a different day. But app is everything that is your application code. It has the HTTP controllers, it has the console commands and the kernel to register them, as well as using Laravel's scheduled task, which is basically its own like ingrown cron scheduler. So you can actually version control your cron tab. Config will have all the config files, including any vendor published configurations. Database contains seeds, migration files. Public is basically it's the same as Symfony's. It's the entry point. It's where your Apache or Nginx vhost or .htaccess should be pointed to and correctly securing, so someone can't go to your website.com/.env and suddenly you're in trouble. Resources, JavaScript, CSS, vendor resources of the same like, as well as your blade templates, routes, the routes of your application. You can configure not only just your regular web routes, but you can kind of configure like kind of sockety put web type things here too. We're not really explaining that well, but like the channels for Laravel Echo, for example, and I think it still has a consoles.php. You can like on the fly create basically closure artisan commands if you want to take that route. I have in some cases for quick and dirty. Storage is logs, framework cache, where if your application is using local storage instead of a cloud driver like S3 or Google Cloud or whatever the hell. Storage is where your files will get stored by the application. Test, because like Josh said, we're all writing test, obviously, all the time, totally. Excuse me. And then vendor, our good old buddy vendor from Composer, our favorite folder, and the folder most likely rm-rf'd when things aren't working.
And probably the folder between that and storage causing Docker to completely crash.
Not no.
One interesting difference here, just to point out, again, Laravel, going, hey, this is Sail, I think in this case, but here's a Docker Compose for you to use, and here's Webpack, Mix. I think Elixir is Symfony's answer to Mix, if I'm not mistaken. They've kind of took some notes from Laravel, like how easy it was for, let's say, a backend developer to be venturing into the front end side. You're right, Webpack and its errors can be dreadfully confusing. So yes, I think those sorts of tools are great for, especially backend developers having to get tossed into the front end world, making things a heck of a lot easier. but yeah, I mean, all in all, yeah, the .env thing, I've been in that same boat. It's funny. I think right now, if you go onto GitHub and you just search for like AWS underscore secret underscore key equal, and you only looked for .env files, I guarantee you could find some AWS credentials. It happens. So, but yeah.
Agreed. In the interest of time, do you want to skip ahead past? I think we've touched on the CLI interfaces. Do you want to jump into?
Yeah, but yeah. So both of them got cool little commands, starter kits. Maybe you want to speak about Breeze.
Yeah, I mean it to not basically just read exactly what's on the slide. Like it's a kind of a very minimalistic starter kit to Laravel. So instead of having to build all the auth, scat everything for you, email verification, all that stuff that most apps need, but no one likes to build over and over again, Breeze will give it to you out of the box with some very basic blade templates and uses Tailwind CSS. Any of the tools that the starter kits are going to use something like Tailwind, but you can't configure that. And Breeze does work with things like Inertia.js. I actually used Breeze, or maybe it was Jetstream. One of the two. They're very similar, which can be confusing. Works with Inertia.js, which is great because Inertia.js is got adapters for Vue, React, or Svelte. It's kind of a modern way to build a SPA or single page application style application without having to first learn how to build an API and then learn how to build an SPA and then do both those things, which was great for me because I'm absolute trash at front end, but I'm really good at building APIs. So Inertia allowed me to not have to figure out the stuff that I'm bad at and just jump into making the thing and then I learn it later. So, but with Breeze, you can choose which kit you install or starter kit, and then jump from there. Jetstream it's Breeze, but with more. I mean, it says it there. If you're brand new to Laravel, start with Breeze, and then graduate to Jetstream. And it's Jetstream is a full scaffolding for Laravel that includes all those fun login things we talked about, as well as the scaffolding for two-factor authentication. I did use Breeze because I didn't have that code already for me, so I'm gonna have to figure that out in my side project, or just steal whatever Jetstream does. The beauties of open source code. Your session management, it brings in some API management for you out of the box through Laravel Sanctum, another great tool from the ecosystem. You can even do some team management with Jetstream if that's the style of project you're building. And then, yeah, once again, Tailwind CSS and Laravel very married together. I'm not surprised with how buddy Adam Weathen and Taylor Atwell are. And then you can use Livewire or Inertia.js. Both very cool, very awesome tools to help traditionally back-end engineers cut their teeth on front-end development.
What does it mean API support with Laravel Sanctum? I've never used Laravel Sanctum, so just what is that?
So I feel like API support is actually not the right way to phrase this. I would say API authentication support. So Sanctum is the Laravel ecosystem's answer for that midway point between I just need a page where I log in with a username and password, and that's great, to holy shit OAuth 2 server and the full implementation, which is great if you're building a product that people should be able to authenticate to your APIs or application, and or you have mobile apps where the OAuth flows make sense for authentication and login. Sanctum gives you the in between of that point where you can have API access even for and authentication for SPAs and mobile apps that utilizes Laravel's default authentication sessions, and it does all that for you. So you can like if you don't need OAuth 2 to build an app that also maybe has an API access or mobile app access, or you're doing a traditional SPA, so you're not using things like Livewire or Inertia, Sanctum is great because it gives you everything from personal access token generation to generating and revoking tokens for different clients and etc. So
yeah, I remember working on a Laravel project, must have been before that existed, but it was a mobile app that was using that Laravel backend, and it was a little messy when it came to the authentication layer. So that makes sense. Sorry, I was more curious. I'm like asking about stuff too.
We're covering different parts of both of these frameworks, ecosystems of features. That makes sense. And yeah, I've implemented an OAuth 2 server in Laravel. If I have my say in it, I will never do that in my professional career ever again. But because it sucked. But
yeah, that can be daunting for a developer to try to figure out. OAuth in general, it's just scary. Yeah. So anyway, Symfony routing. Again, Symfony gives you a lot of different ways to configure your routing. You can do it via YAML. So in this case, you can see here, we have a controller on the left, and then over here in our routes YAML file, we say, here's a controller, here's a path. You can also use annotations, which I prefer. They're pretty sweet because you can also put in all of your firewall rules or guards, if you want to call them that, with Symfony. To make sure people have certain roles or permissions before they can access certain endpoints and things like that. Multiple ways to configure routes. So, and on Laravel.
Let's maybe like do like some summaries.
Yeah, I'm just gonna do a quick go through. Laravel, very similar. There's a few different ways to go about this. Laravel's default is in the routes folder that we talked about. There's two different splits. The framework will automatically split out with different middleware pre-registered for API versus your web routes with some sane defaults defined by the framework. And then you can do closures like before, or if you're using controllers, then you can configure it. The Laravel is very heavy on a fluent syntax or fluent builder syntax. So this route get facade has an entire fluent builder interface to create routes in a more descriptive manner. So there's a lot of different operations, and perfect segue into middleware. Yeah, Laravel is definitely utilizing the decorator pattern. I'm not as familiar with Symfony's middleware implementation, but both frameworks support middleware, which is just a good way to separate and clean out your code to have things that intercept like requests beforehand. So like in this case, this middleware in Laravel is, since it's using that decorator pattern, it's basically just it's a pipeline. That closure is actually a wrapper around this class and other classes like it, and it's just either an onion closures all the way in or the closures all the way down. But this is where you can do things like very contrived example is contrived, but if the token in the input doesn't equal my secret token, then you can redirect users. And you don't have to litter your controllers with code like that. Registering it, you can register them with nice names, showing a Laravel syntax, which you can then specify on routes, either through the route configuration or I think it came back. The controllers themselves, if you extend the framework's base controller, has a way for you to specify the middleware there, but that's generally not recommended. And here you can see like tagging it the auth middleware to a route closure here.
And yeah, I think maybe it even should be called an event pattern versus observer pattern. But, essentially, there's a bunch of different events in Symfony that get fired off at different parts in the application's loading process. So you can see this like kernel event. You can kind of plug in anywhere in the process and listen for an event and then do what you need to, and that's it. So in this case, same kind of example. We're grabbing a token if that token doesn't exist or whatever, we're just redirecting or throwing an exception, I guess, in this case. But yeah, so with Symfony, you're going to be weighting your middleware, so you give things weights. And then in Laravel, you're going to be just kind of using order of importance. So top to bottom, like what's going to get called first all the way down to what's going to get called last. So, and there's an event subscriber there that I was mentioning. And then templating, Twig, very similar to Blade. Both of them share a lot of similar things syntactically. So as far as the differences are concerned, different syntax for control structures. How do you escape code, or like if you wanted to start putting in PHP right in the middle of a template, that's a little different between the two. Handling of variables and the access of that, how to debug both of them too could be its own talk in itself. The ways that you extend Blade or Twig are a little different, and both of their perspectives on security have different kind of aspects there too. Anything you want to add here, Hunter?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, I mean, both options are great. I think what Twig has over Blade at the moment is maturity. Twig has been around a lot longer, so it's had a lot more development time and clearing out, which gave Twig walked so Blade could run, if you want to put it that way. But they're very similar. Blade is just newer on the block and obviously still has a lot of catching up to do to Twig.
Yeah. So when it comes down to how you build your application, the Symfony framework caches views and source. Laravel just caches views. Careful with ORM magic. You on both really, and asynchronous jobs. Database ORMs. I've been around a lot of developers who use Symfony first, and one thing they liked was the data mapper pattern. So you have very lightweight objects when you're working with models versus Laravel. It's like the entire database is built into your model because it's using the active record pattern, which you can do powerful things. You can just save the entity right away after you make updates versus Symfony. You're going to have to grab the Doctrine entity manager, track that entity, and then flush all the queries to run at that point. So it's a little more involved, but you're dealing with more lightweight entities versus Laravel's perhaps more heavy-handed version where you have everything built into your model. Anything to add here, Hunter?
Hit the nail on the head, as we actually work. A lot of our projects use a Laravel Doctrine bridge, so we are not using Eloquent in our Laravel applications, which generally gets a few raised eyebrows, including mine when I started there here. But yeah, they're both great. Personal recommendation, unless you really gotta, don't cram Doctrine in Laravel. You're gonna shoot yourself in the foot. Both community packages that are available to use, and the framework works better with the ORM that it ships with for a lot of good reasons.
That's funny. I had that same case. Inherited a project that also was Laravel with Doctrine, and yeah, if you like Doctrine that much, just go use Symfony. So.
All right, let's do like final 2 minutes. What are your favorite parts of each framework? And then we'll kind of pass it over to some questions and Q&A here. There's probably a lot more to go on the different details. So, all right, who wants to go first?
You kick it off, Hunter.
Oh, okay, the pressure. All right. So I would say the things that I like about Laravel are English. It's rapid. It's easy to use. It's a rapid application development framework through and through, with the ability to be more, but for getting new projects off the ground and getting especially newer developers who may not be as familiar with PHP, let alone the framework, Laravel's great. That is a double-edged sword. You can run into instances where you have a Laravel developer who doesn't know a lick of PHP, but that problem's not unique to Laravel or Symfony or any language. Any framework will allow people to be a framework developer before a language developer. That is the trade-off we take with these frameworks existing. But yeah, it's easy to learn. People can get onboarded quickly. It's easy to make adjustments, especially if you're in a high pivot professional environment, be it a incubator workshop, startup that needs to quickly pivot, etc. It's there. You've got a great ecosystem, so you don't have to do a lot of inventing things yourself. Just plug and play and you're ready to go.
Yeah, and on the Symfony side, great for enterprise applications. Promotes cleaner code, in my opinion. Again, both you can shoot yourself in the foot with either of the frameworks, but you have more ways to kind of configure things and really learning under the hood how to use different packages and stuff. However, there's a steep learning curve compared to Laravel. And all in all, I think both frameworks are great. They both serve great purposes. In fact, Laravel uses some of Symfony components, right? So it's all good that they all share with each other, I think, in the end. So how can they reach you, Hunter, if anybody wants to get a hold of you?
Yeah, so my last name is Annoying, so of course I made it the primary part of my Twitter handle. So you can find me at H Skracek, spelt as it's shown here on Zoom and the meetup page and all that. Twitter is going to be the best place to get a hold of me. You could email me if you find an email. Chances of me responding within the next month or two. You'd have better luck at Vegas.
Yeah, and you can get a hold of me on Twitter or my emails here. So in conclusion here, let's have our elephant battle. So here we go. In this corner, we have Symfony, and in this corner, we have Laravel. So let me stop the screen share here and embarrass myself in front of everyone. 1 second. Screen share, where are you? Stop share. Okay. All right, Tim, I know you're gonna like this one. Here we go. All right. Hey, can I play, guys? No, you're not allowed, Cake. We're fighting. Go back inside. Hey, what about me? Nobody even cares about you anymore. Get out of here. Hey, what are you doing? You're not supposed to fight me. Oh my gosh. Laravel just won. Oh my gosh. Laravel is the champion.
It's official. It's official.
I didn't have my. Look, he's screaming up.
I've never seen that one. All my elephants. I have a Grogu and a goat.
Right. Those are good. Those are good. Well, we did a poll. I did a poll while you guys were talking about 10 minutes ago, 12 minutes ago, and of course we have mostly a U.S. audience here, U.S. and Canada. So Laravel 63%, Symfony 38%. So very very respectable showing by both. Unless we have a few attendees maybe that haven't voted and sway things one way or another, but that was the official for tonight by about 20% in favor of Laravel. So there,
and the host couldn't vote, so we couldn't sway your opinions.
That's right.
Yeah. Josh and I could not vote for the frameworks that we were talking about. Trust me, I tried.
Well, I mean, no, like really flame questions. So I'm gonna open things up. would we have Laravel without Symfony already existing?
No. Laravel, from the beginning, to my knowledge, was built on top of Symfony components. So, that's what's great about the PHP ecosystem, is that everything becomes cyclical. Laravel built on top of Symfony to add a nice, sugar coating and ease of use, and an ecosystem. And with that, things like Flex were inspired and brought in. I'm sure Laravel's done something on top of Symfony components that has been backported to Symfony proper. I just don't know that, and I don't have the time to do that research at the moment. But yeah, without Symfony, Laravel would not be here.
I think that's saying a lot. Okay, so that was a hard one for Hunter. Now a hard one for Josh. Does Symfony have anything similar to Livewire or Breeze or whatever it's called?
Yeah, I think most of the time they're just assuming that you have, a front end developer that has their choice of,
drop in React
either,
or Vue or
I think that there are similar things out there for Symfony, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. But most of the time you're going to be dealing with Vue or React, like in just that whole ecosystem. But I've heard a lot of great things about Tailwind, but for some reason, all the projects I inherit all use Bootstrap. So, but yeah, I think all in all, I could be mistaken, but you probably could use Inertia with Symfony. I'm not sure about Livewire. That might be a little bit more coupled with Laravel.
I think it is. Yeah.
Livewire is very coupled with Laravel. Inertia officially ships with a Ruby on Rails and Laravel server adapter, but there is a community adapter for Symfony to use Inertia with it. It just requires you to use the Twig, Encore, and Serializer pack recipes, but it does support Symfony 5 and 6. So Inertia, I think, is Inertia's pivoted at least to be the more framework agnostic of those two options. You just wouldn't get that impression based off of Inertia's documentation at the moment.
Yeah.
Sorry, there was a question I saw in the chat from Tony that I think would be a good one to discuss. Just repeating it for the live stream and everything, because I don't know if chat's actually streamed or anything. But Tony asks, which would be the best for upgrading a 15-year-old enterprise project built without a framework to a framework? And my first thing would be, when you finish that, Tony, can you make a presentation on like all the trials and tribulations you went through? Because that would be a fascinating story for such an old and storied application. I would actually tend to agree with John Kerry in this sense, because a lot of legacy applications, or legacy is such a loaded term these days, are, I think, are going to be closer in style, like programmatically and structure and everything, to a Symfony project than a Laravel project. So it's going to be easier to map, and Symfony's lack of not necessarily a total lack of opinions, but unopinionated approach to solving all the problems we have to deal with on a day-to-day basis is going to give you a lot of flexibility. You could totally do it in Laravel. I'm sure someone has done it in Laravel, but for something that storied, even as someone who doesn't reach for Symfony, I would reach for Symfony in this case. I don't know what you think, Josh.
Yeah, obviously I'm biased, so I mean, I'd probably go with Symfony in this case, but there's nothing wrong, I think, with going with Laravel. But one thing I would caution is, because my company, Remote Dev Force, we've upgraded a lot of legacy applications, and trying to do everything all at once becomes pain. Like monoliths are hard to work with. So if there's any way that you can introduce one aspect of the application with a new modern framework and slowly migrate the features over to that, I would suggest doing that. Try not to write the whole world and then cut over to the new application, because that's going to have its own. You'll never get it done. You'll be sitting there developing it forever and then realize everything's wrong.
Or you'll have 2 copies of the application that are just forever out of sync while porting, and it's just a nightmare. Like, it's exactly what you said. Like, start with, what's like an easy thing? Oh, routing in the application. Let me just replace our homegrown routing with Symfony router. Okay, cool. Like that in itself is a pretty like monumental change, and just identifying those baby steps and moving. Like, hell, you can use some Laravel things in a Symfony project too. You can use parts of Laravel like it's ORM if you really want that style in a Symfony project. But yeah, Symfony is going to make it a lot easier for you to piece that old application back together in a modern style. Laravel requires a bit more legwork and setup that's not officially documented to get there.
So since that 15-year-old application is probably not running PHP 8, and you definitely want, I mean, you all remember that slide from the beginning of, saying, hey, 8 is great. You're probably not going to want to, copy and paste code from one thing to another. So one thing you can look into is you can deploy your new application in front of the old one. And if there are any routes that you haven't implemented in your new application, you just forward them across back to the old application. And so that way you're not really having to cut anything over, and then you can start porting things over as you're able to and still have the application running. Of course, if you have any caching or anything like that, that's going to be difficult to get, the 2 different things talking to each other. And of course, 2 different applications reaching into the same database can get kind of messy, but it's definitely worth a look into.
Yeah, I was gonna say Nginx routing, like route stuff to one, and then route a path to the old one and the one to the new. But that's an even better idea. But yeah, don't rewrite it and try to cut over at once. You will not like that experience.
All right,
if it
then
goes
Josh,
well for
I'll send you
you,
a bill for that idea, Josh.
but if you do manage that direct code over, like I said, turn that into a presentation, because I feel like you'd get some pretty instant acceptance is for a lot of conferences.
Yeah, that would be. I feel like that's an underappreciated topic, is legacy, upgrading legacy code.
Yeah, another approach, and this comes from, I'm going to butcher the name of the book horribly. Actually, I'm also going to forget the author too, but there's I think, Modernizing Legacy PHP Applications. That's the title. And author's name, I apologize, but you did your job with the book. The first thing he approaches in the book for handling that too, we're definitely sidebarred from Laravel versus Symfony at this point, but that book also brings in like, hey, especially if it's a 15-year-old application, I could imagine Composer was not part of its initial setup, and maybe it is now. But if you can get your application loading through Paul Jones, there we go. If you can get your application loading and using Composers and its autoloader and everything, that will also be a pretty monumental step. Sidebar over.
Yeah, I could talk legacy code all day. In fact, at Longhorn, I was talking with Felina for forever about legacy code. It's one of those things none of us like to touch, and then once you do, I was only able to get 5.5 running. I could not get anything before 5.5 running in Docker because I have a new client that has some very old code. So I'm going through that whole thing right now. It's painful.
Yeah, I mean, I would say something we talked on earlier in our presentation or discussion about like this is a knock on Laravel. I don't think it's necessarily a specific Laravel problem, but it does the framework does give, like you said, gives you a lot of rope to hang yourself with. The application that we acquired, like it's necessarily nothing's wrong with it. It obviously is working well enough for the company that I work at to go, hey, we want that, and then acquired them. But the code is very much, stinks, for lack of a better word, of rapid application development woes and scaling not being part of it and things like that. So that on top of a older application and all the internal Laravel tools we've built all being too new for this thing, it's been an interesting project, and it's if anything, it's made me start to realize more why as I'm getting older and further in my career, why I'm starting to like things more, like TypeScript and strongly typed PHP and these more set paradigms and styles, because it makes just code easier to read and follow and maintain. Because right now, not easily read code, because it was just contract work thrown together for as quick as possible for as cheap as the original owner could get. Nothing wrong, gotta make a business. But picking it up now has created some headaches, not unfortunately compounded on by the fact that the developer is based in the Ukraine. So this has been the poster child for why documentation and code, it can be very helpful, because if the developer is unavailable due to a global conflict. So
Yeah, that's terrible.
What I do actually, hey, I like it. Symfony, Laravel doesn't do this. I like that Symfony does this. Symfony has, along with a lot of other tools, the standard Ukraine branding on it, and Laravel doesn't. Slackers.
Weird. Odd. Yeah. Off topic a little bit, but shout out open sourcing mental illness. If you want to find out more, osmhhelp.org. They're an awesome organization. I think we've all kind of spotted around conferences and whatnot. If you're struggling with mental illness or know someone, it's a great place to find resources regarding that. We're talking about ropes and hanging yourself all the time, so I just want
I couldn't think of a better analogy for that one, but
yeah,
it's well known for a reason.
I bit my tongue too after I said it, but yeah.
Osme Chanel, highly recommend them. They are the only reason I learned what anxiety was, and also I learned that very same moment, a lot of things make sense now. I don't know if Laracon, whenever it was in Kentucky last, was the right place to have that realization of my life, but it happened, which is important and awesome. So
yeah, cool. We have any other last questions before we wrap this up?
I think we covered everything from. I didn't see any other questions. Did any of the other organizers catch anything we missed?
Yeah, from our beautiful panelists. Are we all good? Yep. Okay.
All right. I'm gonna stop the recording. Just stick around for a few minutes. The bonus session. Bye, everybody.